My name is Tori Townsend, and for as long as I can remember, my father insisted that I didn't belong to him. He never said it quietly. He never kept the suspicion to himself. Instead, he repeated it so often that it became part of my identity. According to him, my blonde hair and blue eyes were proof that my mother had betrayed him. Evidence of an affair he claimed had happened before I was even born. For 28 years he treated me like a living reminder of a crime he believed my mother had committed. Then, 6 weeks before my wedding, he finally decided to prove it. And what happened next didn't just destroy his accusations. It destroyed everything we thought we knew about our family. Hooked. The confrontation happened during Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Fairfield, Connecticut. The house was exactly the kind my father loved showing off. 6 bedrooms. Stone exterior. Polished hardwood floors that gleamed under the dining room chandelier. My mother kept everything spotless. She polished the china every week as if perfection might somehow protect her from my father's constant suspicion. At the head of the table sat my father, Gerald Townsend. Across from him sat my mother, Diane, gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles had turned white. My grandmother Eleanor sat near the window, her silver hair pinned neatly back as she watched my father with quiet intensity. My older brother Marcus sat beside me, staring down at his plate like he wished he could disappear. Dinner had been quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that usually meant something unpleasant was coming. Then my father cleared his throat. "I won't be attending your wedding, Tori." The words landed like an explosion. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "Gerald," she whispered nervously, "please, not tonight." But he ignored her. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He slid it across the table toward me. "I've thought about this for a long time," he said calmly. "I won't walk another man's daughter down the aisle." I looked down at the paper. It was a consent form for a DNA paternity test from a local genetics clinic. His signature was already at the bottom. "You have 6 weeks," he continued. "Take the test, share the results with the family." He leaned back in his chair, watching me carefully. "If you're actually my daughter, I'll attend the wedding." He paused. "I might even apologize." The smile on his face never reached his eyes. "But we both know what the results will show." Across the table, my grandmother's teacup struck the saucer with a sharp crack. My mother had started crying. Silent tears slipped down her cheeks as she stared at the table. And I just sat there looking at my father's expensive watch reflecting the chandelier light. 28 years. That's how long he had been building toward this moment. Letzten Monate wären wir vor. The truth was, none of this surprised me. My father's cruelty followed a pattern. Predictable. Relentless. When I was 7 years old, I first realized I was different. I remember pressing my ear against my parents' bedroom door after hearing my mother crying. "Look at that blonde hair," my father said bitterly. "Where did it come from, Diane?" Certainly not from me. At 12, I wanted to join my school's volleyball team. My father refused to sign the permission form. "I'm not paying for someone else's kid," he said loudly enough for my brother to hear. Marcus got new baseball equipment that same week. At 18, Marcus went to Boston University. "My father paid for everything." tuition, housing, spending money. When I got accepted into nursing school, my father looked at me across the same dining table and said something I'll never forget. "Your real father can pay for that." So I took out loans. I worked night shifts at a diner. 6 years later, I graduated with my degree and $60,000 of debt. The worst part wasn't the money. It was what his accusations did to my mother. Every argument, every disagreement, every problem somehow led back to me. I was his evidence, his weapon, the living proof of a betrayal that had never happened. Ich vor Ort. The night before I left for college, my grandmother pulled me aside. She held my wrist tightly. "Keep every document from the hospital where you were born," she told me. "Your birth certificate, every piece of paperwork." Her voice lowered. "I have a feeling we might need them someday." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. But I kept the papers anyway. And 18 years later, I would finally learn why. Oh. Belegtsbewijze unterniesen ausbeschützt. Wie anderes an einem stickig in Haaren wie im Gewannen von nichten werkt. That night after the dinner confrontation, I drove back to my apartment in Hartford. It was a small one-bedroom place filled with second-hand furniture. Nathan was waiting for me on the couch with 2 glasses of wine. The moment he saw my face, he knew something was wrong. What did he do this time? I told him everything. The ultimatum. The DNA form. The 6-week deadline. Nathan listened quietly, his jaw tightening. "Maybe you should take the test," he said finally. "Prove him wrong once and for all." I looked down at the engagement ring on my finger. Nathan had designed it himself. "It's not about proving him wrong anymore," I said. "It's about freeing my mother." Nathan went silent. 5 years earlier, my grandmother had called me at 2 in the morning. She had found my mother in the bathroom beside an empty bottle of sleeping pills. The paramedics arrived just in time. But my father never apologized. He never even acknowledged what his accusations had done to her. Leute, ihr Portrinkt wer den in Tät spart, Kopf stark zu leben. Aber den Falten muss auf und unter Gedaren der Menan, hört Nanan. I opened my laptop and searched for an independent genetics lab. If I was going to take the test, I would do it my way. What I didn't know then was that the results wouldn't just prove my father wrong. They would reveal something far more shocking. Something that would make my father collapse to his knees in front of 60 relatives. 2 weeks after my father's ultimatum, I finally agreed to take the DNA test. But I didn't do it the way he wanted. My father had already selected a clinic, signed the paperwork, and assumed he would control the entire process. He expected a dramatic reveal that would humiliate my mother and confirm the story he had been telling for nearly 3 decades. I refused to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I chose a completely independent genetics laboratory in Hartford. Nathan helped me research it. Certified. Accredited. And most importantly, completely separate from anything my father could influence. If I was going to do this, I wanted the truth. Not his version of it. Es geht. The lab was quiet and sterile, the kind of place that felt more like a research facility than a medical office. A technician named Dr. Reyes greeted me calmly. She explained the process carefully. 3 samples, she said. 1 from you, 1 from the alleged father, and ideally 1 from the mother as well. My sample was simple. A quick cheek swab sealed inside a sterile tube. My mother's sample had been voluntary. The night before, she handed it to me with steady hands, even though her eyes were full of tears. Whatever the results say, she told me quietly, you're my daughter. Nothing will ever change that. Getting my father's DNA was more complicated. He would never agree to give it willingly unless the test was conducted under his terms. So I did something he would never expect. I took a few strands of hair from the brush he kept in the guest bathroom at my parents' house. The same brush I had seen sitting there every Thanksgiving and Christmas for years. The lab accepted the sample without question. 3 sealed containers. 3 pieces of a puzzle. Dr. Reyes explained the timeline. Results will be ready in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. After 28 years of accusations, the truth was finally approaching. Ein Ist-Deal. While we waited for the results, my father continued making the situation worse. 3 days after the test, he sent an email. Not just to me. To the entire extended family. 47 recipients. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. People I hadn't spoken to in years. My mother and grandmother were copied on the message. The subject line read, regarding Tori's wedding. I opened the email while sitting in my car outside the hospital where I worked. My hands trembled against the steering wheel. The message began politely enough, but the tone changed quickly. He wrote about the burden he had carried for 28 years. He wrote about my mother's supposed betrayal. And he explained that he had asked me to take a DNA test before my wedding. Then came the line that made my stomach twist. Tori has refused to share the results so far, which speaks for itself. That wasn't even true. The results didn't exist yet. But he didn't care about accuracy. He cared about controlling the narrative. Attached to the email was an old photograph from my christening. I remembered that picture. It had always sat on my grandmother's mantle. In the photo, I was 3 months old, cradled in my mother's arms. Around us stood my father, my brother, and a dozen dark-haired relatives. My father had circled my face in red. Underneath it, he typed one caption. Spot the difference. Within hours, the replies began flooding in. Some relatives defended my mother. Others simply asked questions. But the damage had already been done. The whispers had started again. In die Atemfeldig zu bekindet. Marcus called me that evening. Just do what Dad wants, he said impatiently. You're making this worse. I'm making it worse? I repeated. You're ruining his reputation, Marcus replied. For a moment, I just stared at the phone. His reputation. That's what he was worried about. Not my mother. Not the truth. His reputation. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. Marcus hung up without another word. 3 weeks later, the email from the genetics lab arrived. It was a Tuesday night. Nathan was out of town for work, and I was alone in the apartment. The subject line was simple. Your DNA analysis results. I opened the secure document. At first, the words didn't make sense. So I read them again.
And then again.
The first result was exactly what I expected. Subject A. Tori Townsend shows 0% genetic match with Subject B. Gerald Townsend. My father was not my biological father. I had prepared myself for that possibility. But then I read the next line. And the room began to spin. Subject A. Tori Townsend shows 0% genetic match with Subject C. Diane Townsend. I stopped breathing. 0%.
Not my father's daughter.
And not my mother's either. I called the lab immediately. A technician patiently reviewed the report with me. No contamination, she said.
No processing errors.
The results are conclusive. I wasn't related to either of my parents. Which meant one thing. My mother had never cheated. My father had been wrong about that accusation for 28 years. But it also meant something else.
Something impossible.
If my mother hadn't had an affair, if she had been telling the truth all along, then how was I not her daughter? I sat on my kitchen floor for nearly an hour staring at the ceiling. For 28 years, my father had insisted I wasn't his child. He had been right about that. But he had been completely wrong about the reason. The real question now was far more complicated. If Diane Townsend wasn't my biological mother, then whose daughter was I? The next morning, I drove to my parents' house to show my mother the results. And what she said next made everything even stranger. Because she remembered something about the night I was born. Something that had never made sense. Something that happened during 11 missing minutes at the hospital. And those 11 minutes were about to expose a secret that had been buried for nearly 3 decades. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house with the DNA results on my phone. My father was at his weekly golf game, which was exactly what I had hoped for. My mother was sitting in the sunroom when I arrived, wrapped in a robe and holding a cup of tea. The sunlight streamed through the glass windows behind her, but the moment she saw my face, her expression filled with concern.
Tori, what's wrong?
I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat down across from her and handed her my phone. The lab report was still open on the screen. I watched her read it. At first her eyes moved slowly across the page. Then they stopped. She blinked.
Read the lines again.
Then again. The color slowly drained from her face. This can't be right, she whispered. I called the lab, I said quietly. They confirmed it. There's no mistake. She looked at me, panic rising in her voice. But I gave birth to you. I know. I was in labor for 14 hours, she said, her voice trembling.
I remember everything. I remember the doctor.
I remember hearing you cry. She grabbed my hands, squeezing them tightly. I held you. You were red and screaming and... Mom. I held her hands gently.
I believe you.
She stared at me, confused. Then how? There's only one explanation, I said slowly. Something happened at the hospital.
The words hung between us.
Neither of us wanted to say them out loud, but the possibility was impossible to ignore.
A switch, my mother whispered.
Yes. Her eyes widened suddenly. The time, she said. What time? I asked.
The birth certificate.
She stood quickly and walked to a nearby drawer where she kept important documents. After a moment, she pulled out a folder and handed me the paper inside. I already knew what it said.
Time of birth, 11:47 Uhr abends. My mother shook her head.
That's wrong.
How do you know?
Because I remember looking at the clock, she said. The doctor made a joke about almost having a leap day baby. She paused. You were born at 11:58 p.m.
11 minutes later. 11 minutes.
It suddenly felt like those 11 minutes had rewritten 2 entire lives. If I'm not your biological daughter, I said carefully, then your real daughter is out there somewhere. My mother's eyes filled with tears. A 28-year-old woman, living someone else's life. The realization hit both of us at the same time. Somewhere out there was a woman who had been raised by another family. And she was supposed to be here. With us. We have to find her. My mother said through tears. We have to find both of you.
Janen Tagen sie da fragte. Seid das bereitet halt ihr breiten sie eine Narkose.
That afternoon I made another phone call. This one to a woman whose name my grandmother had mentioned years earlier.
Margaret Sullivan.
The head nurse who had been on duty the night I was born. The phone rang 6 times before someone answered. Hello? Her voice sounded older than I expected. Slightly shaky. Mrs. Sullivan, I said.
My name is Tori Townsend.
I was born at St. Mary's Hospital in March of 1997.
I believe you were the head nurse that night.
There was a pause. A long one. Then her voice suddenly changed.
I can't help you. The words came fast.
Panicked.
Mrs. Sullivan, please.
I just need to ask. I don't know what you're talking about. Her voice trembled.
Please don't call here again.
Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. Nathan looked up from his laptop across the room.
She hung up on you.
Yes. But she panicked, I said. Nathan frowned. What do you mean? An innocent person would have been confused. Years.
Nee, ist so.
3 days later, something else happened. My father found out about the DNA test. Marcus had apparently seen the confirmation email on my mother's phone. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. When I answered, my father sounded almost excited. So it's true, he said immediately. What is? I asked carefully. The test. He laughed.
A sharp, triumphant sound.
28 years, Tori. 28 years I've been telling everyone something wasn't right. I stayed silent. That silence was all the confirmation he needed. I knew it, he said proudly.
I knew you weren't my daughter.
He began pacing on the other end of the phone. I'm sending another email to the family, this time with proof.
Gerald, I started.
You see, he interrupted. Your mother lied to me for decades. His voice was filled with vindication. Now everyone will finally see the truth. He hung up before I could say anything else. Within the hour, he sent another message to the entire family. And this time, he included the DNA results. But he didn't understand what those results actually meant. He thought they proved his theory. He had no idea they were about to destroy it.
SB una vida.
Later that evening, my grandmother arrived at the house to stay with my mother. My mother was curled on the couch when I walked in. My grandmother stood nearby like a quiet guard. "He thinks he won," I said softly. My grandmother's sharp eyes met mine. "Then it's time we show him the rest of the story." She paused. "And to do that,
we need Margaret Sullivan to talk."
I nodded, which meant I had to try one more time. This time I left a voicemail.
"Mrs. Sullivan, this is Tori Townsend again.
I have DNA evidence proving a baby was switched at St. Mary's Hospital on March 15, 1997. I took a deep breath. I'm not looking to blame anyone. I just need to know who I am. Then I added one final sentence. If you don't call me back, my next call will be to a lawyer. I hung up. Then I waited. 1 hour passed. Then another. Finally, at 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It contained only one message. Thursday, 2 p.m.
Riverside Diner, Bridgeport. Come alone.
I stared at the screen for several seconds. After 28 years, the truth about that night was finally coming out. But I had a feeling what Margaret Sullivan was about to tell me would change everything.
Because somewhere out there
was the woman who had been living my life. And I was about to find her. The Riverside Diner looked like it hadn't changed in 30 years. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape.
A faded jukebox humming softly in the corner.
The smell of coffee that had probably been brewing since sunrise. It wasn't the kind of place where life-altering truths were supposed to be revealed. But that's exactly what happened there. Margaret Sullivan was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. She had positioned herself with her back against the wall, facing the entrance like someone who had spent years expecting trouble. She looked smaller than I expected. Her silver hair was pulled tightly into a bun, and her hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee cup. When I sat down across from her, she studied my face carefully. "You look just like her," she said quietly.
My heart skipped.
"Like who?"
Margaret hesitated.
Then she said the words that changed everything.
Linda Morrison.
She looked down at the table. "Your biological mother."
The air in my lungs disappeared.
"You know who she is?" Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears. "I've carried this secret for 28 years, she said. "Every single day I wondered if I should have spoken up." She slowly opened her purse and pulled out a worn leather notebook. The pages were yellowed with age. "This is my shift log from March 15, 1997. She pushed it across the table. "The night you were born." My hands trembled as I opened it. Her handwriting was small but clear, and every line made my stomach drop.
11:47 Uhr abends. Baby girl born to Diane Townsend,
Healthy.
11:58 Uhr abends. Baby girl born to Linda Morrison,
Healthy. I swallowed hard. 2 babies.
11 minutes apart.
Then my eyes moved to the next entry. 12:32 a.m. Incident. Trainee nurse mixed up infants after bathing. My heart began pounding. 2:15 a.m. Error discovered. I looked up slowly. You fixed it, right?
Margaret shook her head. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. No.
She pointed to the final line in the notebook.
2:45 Uhr nachts. Meeting with Hospital Administration.
Decision made to correct records, not families.
I stared at her.
They knew? She nodded slowly. The administrator said switching the babies back would cause more trauma.
Her voice cracked.
Both mothers had already held their daughters, fed them, named them. The hospital chose to hide the mistake. They made us sign non-disclosure agreements, Margaret said. They threatened our licenses, our pensions. She wiped her eyes. I had 2 children at home. I was terrified. For 28 years she had kept silent. And 2 families had lived the wrong lives because of it.
Leben.
I forced myself to ask the question that mattered most. What happened to the other baby? Margaret reached into her purse again and pulled out a printed page. It was a social media profile. A woman about my age smiled at the camera. Brown hair.
Warm brown eyes. A familiar jawline.
Too familiar.
This is Rachel Morrison, Margaret said.
She's 28 years old.
She lives in Springfield, Massachusetts.
She looked at me carefully. She's the biological daughter of Diane and Gerald Townsend. The room suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. The daughter my parents had been looking for their entire lives had been raised by someone else. And the man who had spent 28 years accusing my mother of cheating had unknowingly been wrong the entire time.
Irrensinn.
That night I sat on my couch staring at Rachel's online profile. Elementary school teacher. Graduate of UMass Amherst. Volunteer at a local animal shelter. Her smile looked strangely familiar. The same shape as my brother Marcus's. The same expression I had seen on my father's face countless times. I rewrote the message to her 17 times before finally sending it. Hi Rachel, I typed. This is going to sound unbelievable, and I'm sorry for how strange it might seem.
My name is Tori Townsend.
I was born at St. Mary's Hospital on March 15, 1997, the same night as you. I explained the DNA test. The hospital mistake. The nurse's testimony. Then I wrote the sentence that felt impossible.
I believe you are the biological daughter of Diane and Gerald Townsend.
And I believe I am the biological daughter of Linda Morrison. I stared at the message for several seconds before pressing send. Then I closed the laptop before I could panic.
SAE AGD Bizufar auch.
24 hours passed. I checked my phone constantly. Every few minutes. Finally, the next evening, my phone rang.
Unknown number.
I answered immediately. Hello? The voice on the other end sounded nervous. Is this
Tori?
Yes. A long silence followed.
Then she exhaled slowly.
My whole life people have told me I don't look like my parents, she said. My dad used to joke that maybe the hospital made a mistake. She let out a small, shaky laugh. I guess it wasn't a joke after all. Rachel and I talked for 3 hours that night. About childhood. About family. About how strange it felt to suddenly realize our lives had been switched. By the end of the call, we had both agreed on one thing. We needed proof. Rachel agreed to take a DNA test comparing her results with Gerald and Diane. If the science confirmed what Margaret Sullivan said, everything would finally make sense. The lab promised results within 10 days. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Because in 10 days, my engagement party would take place. 60 relatives would be there, including my father, the man who had publicly accused my mother for nearly 3 decades. And when the DNA results arrived, I knew exactly how I was going to reveal them. In front of everyone.
Because if my father wanted a public humiliation,
I was finally ready to give him one. But not in the way he expected. My engagement party was held at my grandmother Eleanor's estate. It was the kind of place built for celebrations, a large Georgian manor surrounded by gardens and tall oak trees wrapped in warm lights. Nearly 60 guests had arrived that evening. Family members, friends, and every single relative who had received my father's humiliating email. I wore a navy blue dress and tried to remain calm while greeting people. Nathan stayed beside me the entire time, his hand resting gently on my back whenever he sensed my nerves rising. My mother arrived with my grandmother shortly after the guests began filling the garden. Her eyes were still red from days of crying, but there was something different about her posture. For the first time in years, she stood straighter. As if the truth had already begun lifting the weight she had carried for decades. Then my father arrived. Exactly as expected, late. He walked in confidently, wearing an expensive suit and the same expression of smug certainty he had carried his entire life. He believed the night would confirm everything he had accused my mother of for 28 years. He had no idea what was about to happen.
Wollten.
Halfway through the evening, my father asked for a microphone. The music faded as conversations slowly quieted. He stepped onto the small platform my grandmother had prepared for speeches. "I'd like to congratulate Nathan," he began with a forced smile. "You're a brave man for marrying into this complicated family." A few awkward chuckles passed through the crowd. Then his eyes locked onto me. "But I think everyone here knows why we're really gathered tonight."
The room grew silent.
"For nearly 3 decades," he continued, "I've carried doubts about my daughter's parentage."
My mother froze beside me.
"I asked Tori to take a DNA test," he said proudly. "And now we finally have the truth." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket. My son Marcus was kind enough to share the results. Marcus looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. My father unfolded the paper dramatically. 0% genetic match with Gerald Townsend.
Gasps spread through the crowd. My father's voice grew louder.
0% genetic match with Diane Townsend. He turned toward my mother with visible triumph. For 28 years I told everyone something wasn't right. His voice rose with vindication. And now science has proven it. He stared directly at my mother.
"You lied to me, Diane."
"You lied to everyone."
The silence in the garden felt suffocating.
Then I began walking toward the stage.
fällt.
Gerald, I said calmly, taking the microphone from his hand. You're right about one thing.
The crowd leaned forward.
The DNA results do show that I'm not your biological daughter. My father smiled smugly. But his smile faded quickly when I continued. And they also show that I'm not Mom's biological daughter either.
A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd.
I turned toward the guests. All of you deserve to know the full story. Then I nodded toward the side entrance. The door opened.
Rachel walked inside.
28 years old. Brown hair. Brown eyes. And a jawline unmistakably identical to my father's. The room exploded with whispers. This, I said, is Rachel Morrison. She was born 11 minutes before me at St. Mary's Hospital on March 15, 1997.
I tapped the remote in my hand. A large screen behind the stage lit up.
Rachel's DNA report appeared. 99.97% genetic match with Gerald Townsend. 99.98% genetic match with Diane Townsend. She is your biological daughter, Gerald. The room fell completely silent. For 28 years, I continued, you accused my mother of cheating. But the truth is far worse. I explained everything. The trainee nurse who accidentally switched 2 babies after their baths. The hospital discovering the mistake hours later. The administrators deciding it would be easier to change the paperwork instead of telling the families. Then Margaret Sullivan slowly stood from her seat in the crowd. The elderly nurse walked forward with trembling hands. I was there that night, she said quietly.
Your wife never betrayed you. The truth echoed through the garden.
For nearly 3 decades, Diane Townsend told the truth.
And the hospital hid the mistake.
I turned back toward my father. He looked completely frozen. His eyes moved between Rachel, my mother, and the DNA report glowing behind us. Then something inside him finally broke. His knees buckled. Gerald Townsend collapsed onto the stage. For the first time in my entire life,
I saw my father cry.
I didn't know, he whispered hoarsely. You could have trusted her, I said quietly. For 28 years you chose suspicion instead. Across the garden, Marcus walked over and wrapped his arms around our mother. Mom, I'm sorry, he said. I should have defended you years ago. My mother simply held him tightly. Then she walked slowly toward Rachel. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Hello. Rachel looked just as overwhelmed.
My name is Diane.
She reached out gently.
I'm your mother.
The 2 women hugged as the crowd watched in stunned silence. 28 years of separation ended in one moment.
Lu in dir Worten wei, de? Sego mitte, dich selbst ist auch nur Deutschen, weil Deutschen vor, weil nur w, all.
The weeks that followed were complicated. Rachel slowly began building relationships with the family she had never known. I met my biological mother, Linda Morrison, who had unknowingly raised Rachel. 2 families began learning how to coexist with a truth none of us expected.
And my father.
For the first time in his life, he started therapy, trying to repair the damage he had caused.
Weiser.
2 months later, I married Nathan in my grandmother's rose garden.
My mother walked me down the aisle.
Not Gerald. That moment belonged to her.
Rachel stood beside my bridesmaids.
And my biological mother sat proudly in the front row. When my grandmother raised her glass during the reception, she said something I will never forget. "This wedding is not just about 2 people," she said. "It's about a family finally finding its way back to the truth."
Gas, 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 geh.
For 28 years my father was certain he was right. His certainty destroyed trust, damaged relationships, nearly broke my mother. But the truth has a strange way of surviving. Sometimes it waits decades. Sometimes it needs science. Sometimes it needs a brave nurse willing to finally speak. But eventually, the truth always finds its way out. And when it does,
It changes everything.